was the kind of message you reread because your brain refuses to accept the first pass. It was hilarious. You should have seen your face, snoring while I slipped out. I sat on the edge of a hotel bed in Stockholm, with early light sliding around blackout curtains, and let the words do their mean little dance. My name is Connell, 31, mechanical engineer from Louisville, and my wife Veronica had vanished between 3 and dawn. Her suitcase was gone. Her hairbrush and serums and the travel-size perfume that smelled like oranges were gone. Her side of the sink looked like a staged apartment. All that remained was my toothbrush, my passport on the desk, and a new, tight knot where sleep had been a few minutes earlier. The front desk clerk confirmed what the room already told me. He said it with that unruffled Swedish calm that makes any disaster sound like weather. Yes, she checked out at 3 a.m. Yes, she took the airport shuttle. Yes, she mentioned we had different departure arrangements. Different arrangements. Our ticket said otherwise. 2 seats home on the 6 o'clock evening flight I'd booked months ago. The airline agent, devastatingly polite, laid the last card on the table. She had phoned the day before and moved us both. She boarded the 6 a.m. to Chicago. My reservation had been bumped 5 days into the future. I thanked the agent because that's what you do when humiliation is public, then sat very still and listened to my pulse in my neck. Veronica's spontaneity had always been loud, sparkler bright, and just irresponsible enough to need someone like me beside it. She used to call our pairing perfect physics. Potential energy meets load-bearing structure. Sometimes that was charming. Sometimes it was code for, I'm about to do what I want, and you'll stabilize it. Once it meant inviting 30 people to Thanksgiving with a text at noon. Another time, it meant absorbing our vacation fund into a pottery wheel she used twice before relegating it to the garage and naming it my brief ceramic era. It had never meant changing international flights and sneaking out of a hotel while I slept. Downstairs, I tried to behave like a man with options. The embassy didn't open until 9. The downtown airline desk didn't open for an hour. I could stand under the gentle, pragmatic light of the lobby and buy an earlier ticket at eye-watering cost, or wait 5 days and turn the next week into a case study on stranded Americans. That's when I noticed the woman at the desk, blonde hair caught in a practical ponytail, a suitcase with stories in its stickers, a laptop bag polished by years of use. When she turned, she had the frank blue gaze of someone whose life involves real work and boats. She caught enough of my conversation to sketch the outlines, and, for reasons I could not explain, her expression softened the knot in my chest by a quarter turn. Elsa, she said when we met properly. Marine biologist from Gothenburg. In town for a conference on Arctic shipping routes and their ecological consequences. When I explained the flight switch and the 3 a.m. shuttle and the text message dressed as a prank, she didn't smile or philosophize or tell me about the power of spontaneity. She said, very simply, "That's awful. It's a betrayal." I hadn't let myself use that word yet. Betrayal is heavy metal. You don't take it out unless you're certain it belongs there. But the click it made when it landed was the kind you feel behind your sternum. She called the embassy with me, annotated the transit map like a local teacher, and offered to ride along if I needed a witness to my own story. "We have a word lagom," she said over coffee that tasted like competence. "Not too little, not too much. Balance. What happened to you isn't balanced, so we balance it a little." She asked me about bridges and temperature swings and why expansion joints sing on cold mornings. When I asked about her work, she drew lines in the air that became currents and shipping lanes and the slow logic of ice. I remembered, suddenly and with surprise, what a conversation feels like when it isn't a performance. Veronica had always been extraordinary at attention, gathering it, bending it, making it fizz. People said she was the life of any room, which is lovely, until your marriage becomes a room and you realize the life in it belongs to one person. I spent the first day in bureaucratic loops, and the second in smaller, kinder circles, fika, Elsa called them, where people stop and take coffee and breathe on purpose. Veronica's messages flowed from triumph, "You should have seen yourself," to irritation, "Why aren't you answering?" to dismissal, "You're being dramatic. It was a joke." I didn't answer. I let Stockholm teach me how to move through itself. I let Elsa point at cornices and coats of arms, and the way cobbles remember centuries of feet. The cafe she took me to on Gamla Stan didn't hand us menus. The owner brought cardamom buns that tasted like someone loved flour and thyme. "My grandfather owned this place," she said. "I learned to steam milk before I could ride a bike." Roots, I thought, as her face tilted into the past. Not the kind you trap people with, the kind that hold a shoreline together. That night I called Tyler, my oldest friend, a man who has done drywall and grief with me. "She actually left you," he said, in a tone you use for friends and injuries. "That's not mischief. That's cruelty with a plane ticket." I didn't sleep badly so much as I slept thinly. The next day, Elsa invited me to dinner with colleagues who were the specific kind of scholars that make you want to read more. A climatologist who could talk about ice stress like a poet, a researcher who knew the Latin names of seabirds, but still laughed at her own mispronunciations in English. They listened to my road salt metaphors. They answered naive questions without condescension. The only moment the air tightened was when someone asked, delicately, why my wife wasn't joining us. "Other priorities," I said, and watched a succession of Swedish nods that meant the same thing in any language. After dinner, under a sky that refused to darken at a decent hour, Elsa said something that rearranged furniture in my head. "When you talk about your marriage," she said, "you describe what Veronica does. You don't describe what you do together." It was like discovering you've been tilting a painting for years and finally see it level. We had built a system that ran on reaction. She sparked, and I soothed. She leapt, and I laced the landing. She promised, and I produced. I tried to remember the last time we built a plan with two sets of hands. Maybe the first year. Maybe not. My grandmother had a line, Elsa added, stopping where the light made the water pretend to be gold. "Some people will set your house on fire just to watch you put it out. They call that entertainment." "What do you do with them?" I asked. "Stop giving them matches." The next morning I made a promise to myself that felt small and radical. The day would exist because I chose it. I texted Elsa, "Breakfast?" She suggested a place near the water where the buns come out of the oven with the humility of daily miracles. "Where do you want to go?" she asked over a second cup. "Somewhere you love," I said. Not the museum a guidebook would scold me for missing. Somewhere that explains Elsa. She chose Vaxholm, a ferry ride threaded through sheets of light and islands, wearing red houses that looked like they'd agreed on charm centuries ago. We walked past a fortress designed to say no to fleets. A guide described strategic positioning. Strength is half physics, half where you stand. I could feel the lesson cross over from stone to marriage. Where had I been standing all these years? At the point of impact. Always at the point of impact. My phone kept buzzing. "You're scaring me." "Answer me." "You're being ridiculous." Elsa read one, then another, and said quietly, "Even when she writes, 'I'm worried about you,' the subject is her. Worry as ownership." On the ferry back, I watched the wake unroll and thought about structural engineering in earthquake zones. We don't build to defy the earth. We build to move with it and stay whole. Veronica called unpredictability living. I had mistaken being flexible for being bent out of shape. That night, Elsa asked me what I wanted that didn't fit inside anyone else's story. The question lifted dust from dreams. I told her about Japan, about base isolators, and tuned mass dampers, and the elegance of buildings that say, "We will not break, we will sway." "So go," she said, as if maps were invitations and not negotiations. I slept like a person whose nervous system had finally located an off switch. In the morning, I sent Veronica a sentence designed to be honest and to end a chapter. "Thanks for this, honey. Elsa has been incredibly kind." The reply was not text. It was a call hard enough to vibrate the room. "Who is Elsa?" "A marine biologist who helped when my wife changed my flight and left me." "I didn't abandon you. You changed my booking without telling me, took the earliest plane, and left me to spend 5 days alone in a country where I don't speak the language." Explain how that's not abandonment. Silence is not always an admission. Sometimes it's the sound of a narrative snapping. "It was supposed to be funny," she said at last. "Walk me through the laugh," I said, surprising myself with the evenness in my voice. "Where exactly do we laugh?" "You overthink. I wanted you to be spontaneous. You had credit cards." I was crossing a bridge, the guardrail warm under my palm. "You're right," I said. "I'm not helpless. I learned that this week. So come home and we'll laugh about it later." "I'm thinking of staying," I said. "A while, maybe a long while." Words gathered like thunder on her end, the kind of quick, bright anger that used to make me rush to repair. I didn't. I said goodbye and went for coffee by the water, where mourning dogs pulled their owners with cheerful gravity. Over the next hour, she called 17 times. Over the next month, 51. I answered one, 3 weeks later, when the crying in her voice was no longer weaponized, but real. "Your sister won't talk to me," she said. "Tyler told everyone. My mother said she's embarrassed." Consequences are cruel teachers and patient ones. I didn't gloat. I didn't console. I said, "What outcome did you imagine when you told people you slipped out at 3 a.m. and changed my flight? Did you imagine applause?" She said she had misjudged, that humor is subjective, that I was punitive. I told her I was busy and meant it. I stayed in Sweden 2 months. Elsa and I did not call it anything because some things grow better without labels in the first week. But we built the scaffolding that labels eventually need. Breakfast rituals, work days punctuated by photos of gulls and welds, walks that ended wherever the city gave us a good bench. I consulted on temporary peer reinforcement for a museum key and thought a lot about loads and the miracle of distributed stress. The divorce documents moved like trains through a well-run station hotel records, airline logs, the screenshot of her text sent at 7:01 a.m. The attorney I hired in Louisville said, "This is as straightforward as international abandonment cases get." Her attorney, the same one who used to call her a creative force, advised her not to fight the inevitable. When I flew home to pack what was mine, the story had already done its reckless business. People are kinder than you think until they have evidence you knowingly hurt someone for spectacle. Then they become archivists. Veronica's co-workers in architecture, where deadlines and trust are the bones of the beast, began to ask if creative solutions might mean abrupt, unilateral decisions with expensive fallout. The friends who used to call her unpredictable in the best way started using unreliable with the caution of people learning a new truth about someone they loved. Invitations thinned. Her brother, who had defended her spontaneity like a sport, admitted to my sister that he built backup plans whenever Veronica was involved because events slid around her like oil on a skillet. My mother-in-law, A woman who hates conflict the way cats hate baths, told Veronica that a stunt designed to humiliate one's husband in a foreign country was not whimsy, but cruelty, and that she had raised her to know the difference. I boxed books, clothes, the tools my father gave me, a handful of wedding gifts that were function rather than symbol. I shipped the boxes to a storage unit in Louisville, with my name on the lease, and returned to Sweden with one extra bag and the unnerving lightness that follows an honest decision. The first time I stood on the aft deck of a research vessel with Elsa's team, the Barents Sea had the flat, pewter calm of a held breath. The work I did there, calculating ice loads, recommending micro-adjustments to mounting hardware, translating wave periods into a language steel understands, felt like a promise to my younger self. Your love of problems has a place, and it is not cleaning up after someone else's appetite for drama. I learned small Swedish words that carry large cultural ideas and realized I had been living out of lagom for years. We sailed under a sky that pretended to be dusk for hours and never delivered night. We drank coffee that fought fatigue and cold with equal stubbornness. We slept between metal and water and woke to chart lines that moved with us. Somewhere in that season, Veronica stopped calling. She sent a final email that apologized without metabolizing anything, and then folded herself back into the quiet. I didn't reply, not because forgiveness is impossible, but because sometimes the most respectful thing to do with a person's last message is to set it down like a delicate thing you're not qualified to fix. In spare hours, I wrote to my sister and to Tyler. I told them about seals like commas on ice floes and about the engineer in Tromsø who designed a handrail so elegant it made me want to start over as a student. I told them about Elsa's laugh, the way it starts low when she's truly delighted, and about how she never once used my worst week as conversational currency. When we docked in Kirkenes for resupply, there was a message from a university lab in Hokkaido asking if I'd be interested in a 2-month collaboration on seismic bridge bearings the following spring. I read it 3 times and grinned at a bulkhead. Somewhere in the middle of that grin, I understood the simplest change of all. I no longer measured choices against how Veronica might react. Decisions lived where they should, in the space between my values and the world's needs, in the overlap between what I can do and what I want to try. Months later, I stood on the Big 4 bridge in Louisville during a visit home and watched families push strollers and teenagers learn balance on rented scooters. The river held its brown secrets, and the city threw light on itself, because that's what cities do when they've decided to keep going. I thought about how much of marriage had been like this: bridge beautiful load paths when they worked, hairline fatigue when they didn't, the constant necessity of inspection. Veronica's midnight departure had looked like an explosion from inside the blast radius. From this distance, it looked like a structural test I had finally passed. Elsa met me there a season later, sleeves rolled to her elbows, because the humidity had opinions. She listened while I explained a Midwestern thunderhead and the way the air goes metallic before a storm. We bought popsicles that stained our tongues and talked about Japan and the timing of lives. We didn't make grand vows about forever because our work taught us not to promise outcomes we can't model, but we promised the inputs we could control. Truth without ornament. Care without ledger. A rule against reaching for matches when bored. Sometimes I wake in those thin blue minutes before morning and think about the small hinge on which my life swung. A text meant as a joke that accidentally opened a door, a ferry ride to an island that recalibrated my sense of standing, a woman in a hotel lobby with a scientist's patience and a granddaughter's kindness. Strong systems flex, bridges do, partnerships must. I bent. I did not break. And in the bend, I found the truer line of my life, one that points toward places worth seeing and people who don't confuse entertainment with love.